I'm Em Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
And I am Don Test, better known as the Don of Beer.
Welcome to episode 64 of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. It's Hazy IPA month here at All About Beer, and this first episode will talk about the Hazy IPA roots in New England. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you want to support this show, visit allaboutbeer.com/support. So, Don, what do you think about New England IPAs? You've got to have feelings about them.
What? I've never heard of this
It's
style.
a new, it's an up and coming, brand new style.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, uh I really enjoyed them when they were first booming in popularity. I also really enjoy the fact that as we'll talk about in the next episode, people are kind of interpreting them still. It is a relatively new beer style, so it is still subject to interpretation, and I like that there's a little bit of bitterness being added back to IPA. So I like that. How about you, Em?
I'm excited about this episode because I'm a New Englander,
Yes.
and a very proud one. And I am very excited that, for very much most of my life, New England breweries were doing stuff, but they weren't at the forefront. It felt like everything came from the West Coast. And so I was
Mm.
so excited when breweries like Trillium, our first guest, started brewing these really hazy IPAs, especially beers I really enjoyed. And I felt a sense of pride.
Nice.
And I really liked that. And I'm excited to talk to our two guests about the roots of IPA and why they do New England style and what that means.
When we interview Trillium, are you going to ask all of your questions with a Boston accent?
Absolutely not.
Oh, okay.
But first, if you'd like to help support the All About Beer podcast, reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of supporting the show, here's a word from our sponsor.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Still family owned, operated, and argued over.
JC Tatro is the founder of Trillium. Since opening in 2013, Trillium has grown from a small brewery to a hospitality icon, now operating 5 active locations in Boston and Massachusetts, including 2 full-service restaurants. Most recently, Trillium created their own spirits line and built a distillery at their Canton flagship location, with spirits crafted from grains and botanicals grown at their farm in Connecticut and other locations. Combining his background in biology and biochemistry with rule-breaking initiative techniques, JC and Trillium are able to create a wide range of beers that consistently earn the praise of reviewers and beer fans alike. Quality and experimentation are always at the forefront in JC's approach, whether it's beers and spirits or Trillium's approach to sourcing ingredients from suppliers or growing them themselves, all the way to the brand's commitment to sustainability and community involvement. At home, you'll most likely find JC training for the 2025 Boston Marathon or putting around in his garden. Welcome to the show, JC.
Hey, how are you?
I am very well, and thank you so much for coming to talk hazies and New England IPAs with Don and myself today. First question, I wanted to get your thoughts on a lot of people on the history of New England IPA, because a lot of people have varying thoughts about this. Do you have any, like, where do you think New England IPAs came from? Because
Yeah, so
they were nowhere and then they were everywhere and now they're everywhere everywhere.
yeah, so we're sort of in the collection of a smaller group of breweries in the 2013 2014 era. Certainly not in the first wave necessarily. That's certainly with in the camp of the Alchemist and Hill Farmstead and Lawson's and those folks. And I think that, the awareness of their beers and how clearly, no pun intended, differentiated they were
Hey,
from all the other hoppy styles of beers that were out there. It gave you a way to recognize should it also be put in front of you or coming out of your own tanks. So that it has its own distinct personality, so that when we were doing a lot of test brewing, it wasn't sort of a goal to um, create them. I don't want to say we stumbled upon them, but when they were happening, or there was a signal that a part of it was happening, we could recognize it and then make incremental strides towards amplifying that element of the character of the beer.
Oh, okay.
Does that
Well,
make any sense?
Yes. No, because
but
I put you guys in the like in like if there was like a Mount Rushmore of hazy IPA or New
Oh
England
boy.
IPA for like creating it, you're in there for me as
Oh
and I'm
boy.
a New Englander, so I was there, you know, with you.
what
But yeah, I don't know.
what did you like? Like, I mean, you mentioned, Alchemist and Hill Farmstead. What did you what I did what prompted you to go, oh yeah, we want in on that.
It's a great question, Don. I think that they're much like pants. This was like bifurcated, right? So that there was sort of the entire world of kind of quote unquote East Coast IPAs and West Coast IPAs and everything that fit in between, like in the American IPA pantheon. And then there were these. So
I see.
if not that I didn't love and appreciate them, but kind of if everybody's running in that direction and has been and it has been established, and I don't want to say new tastes incredible, but I love trying and exploring new things as well. So there was something very different. It was a different road that there weren't a ton of examples on. So it was very exciting at that time too, and there just wasn't a lot of it. And then the handful of breweries that were making them very well, there wasn't a lot of volume of those beers. So to get access to them was challenging. So to know that we were getting signals of that in our pilot brewing was extremely exciting. So there was a clear aroma, flavor, texture difference that was just so intriguing to me at that time. And we weren't looking to replicate or duplicate or any of those kinds of things. And I don't want to say we stumbled upon it, but we had this continuous process that we still apply today about how we change one variable to one thing and assess what that does into the finished beer. And that's how we kind of quickly evolved from just a hint of that character in some of those early pilot brews to full on crazy Congress Street in those within that first year.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You touched on it a little. The changes that you've gone through from like your first one, and because your first brewery was what was the capacity of your first brewery?
So the normal numbers need not apply to when we talk about our first brewery on Congress Street. It was 2,300 square feet, but we had offsite storage. We had a 10-barrel brew house, but it was a total piece of shit, like dairy tank mash tun, totally cobbled together, homebrew-esque kind of 10-barrel system. So we crammed a ton of fermenters into pretty much a non-functional production space. We had a bunch of 10-barrel tanks and a bunch of 20-barrel tanks, and call it a 250 or 300 square foot retail space. Can't even call it a tap room because we couldn't even
No, it
serve.
was a counter. I
Yeah, it
remember
was
going.
Yeah, I remember
yeah, just a long low counter. So we towards the end, right before we had opened our first production brewery in Canton, we were actually on pace for producing about 2,500 barrels of beer a year out of that place.
that. Wow.
Hmm.
Almost all out of put into 750 ml bottles, which is kind of nuts.
And
Oh, I
then
remember
like
750
I
ml bottle.
yeah, that's
Anyway,
back in
sorry.
the day. So what was like the first grain bill like versus what you do now? I mean, are you leaning into, were you focusing on like wheat, oats? Were you focusing on like hop, yeast? Has anything changed? Because now I just went to your Canton location and it is very different from the just one long counter. It is, it's huge and it's a wonderful, wonderful space, but it is the opposite of what I think. And it's a giant brewery as well. So like, how do you scale Oh, I just asked you like 8 questions in a row.
Yeah, there's
There's
like
a million
six or
questions.
seven questions folded into one.
I
Let
had
me answer
fun.
let me answer the first one because it is an interesting thing, and very interesting to me to see how the rest of the brewing world around us reacted to these beers because quite a lot the craft brewing industry is so collegial and there's so much sharing of information, but then there's also sort of like this breakneck pace to keep pace. So Trillium was founded as a New England farmhouse inspired brewery, and our first handful of recipes always wanted to consider the inclusion of a non-barley grain or non-barley malt, and our 4-point pale ale included wheat malt in particular. It wasn't a huge percentage of the grist, and we didn't in some of those early pilot recipes we didn't notice an impact on texture, a big impact on texture or mouthfeel, maybe a little bit on flavor relative to some of the other recipes we're making. Our farmhouse red rye was, obviously featured rye. Our porter featured oatmeal, and then they were that was a way to kind of drive that continuity of that farmhouse inspired thing into what we thought were going to be 4 year-round beers. How antiquated is that of a concept? We did not use any unmalted adjuncts. We did not do anything that lots and lots of other brewers assumed we were doing to achieve that kind of a colloidal haze in the beers. People thought it was just loaded with unmalted grain or poor conversion in the mash tun and all kinds of other things that was driving the haze. And from my perspective, it was 99.9% from the biotransformation from a select group of hops with a
Oh,
handful of yeasts that were able to do that biotransformation. We actually have gone through, it might be 4 different house yeasts at this point. So there's no singular, even then, there was no singular yeast that could do biotransformation, but there was a different ability or percentage, I guess, of taking that potential that was present in the hops to do that biotransformation.
so I mean, biotransformation is kind of a hot term right now. And in those early days, were you aware that that was going on, or were you just like, this works, it's magic, we don't get it, but it's awesome?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that we fully understood it, absolutely not. Did we know that it was yeast and hop driven and cellar schedule driven, not grist driven. And
Oh, okay.
um, we knew that the yeast needed to interact with the dry hop, did not have uh, uh, kind of any impact from kettle or late hopping, so that we shifted what was probably like a 50-50 mix of the total hop bill on hot side. We kind of pretty quickly pulled almost all of those really important, characterful and rare at that time and expensive flavor aroma hops, and those went into the dry hop. That combined with the right yeast and then that right cellar schedule. We started out doing kind of the Vinny schedule, right? And you don't want to get as much yeast out of there, drop it to 60 or a little bit below that. Try to flock out your yeast, get your dry hop. We tried doing that, and then where did all the character go? We had the ability to do that in our new brewery. Didn't really have the ability to do that in our pilot batches over at Greentown. And then once we started kind of creeping that cellar temperature up, keeping that yeast happy and awake, then we were getting that biotransformation. Uh,
Okay. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about the grist and, the hops and yeast. And, uh, I mean, do you attribute what makes the beer so good? Is it a particular ingredient? It sounds maybe more like process is as important as the ingredients.
yeah, I think that if you ask pretty much any brewer or chef or any maker, what's the one thing? If the answer doesn't come back, everything's important,
Right.
then
Go
they're
to a different
missing
restaurant or
some,
brewery.
yeah, they're missing some pretty big stuff. So it doesn't matter if you made the best beer in the world. If you get some oxygen in that packaging, the product's crap. So
Right.
Mhm.
everything is important.
A
That's a
lot of
good
people,
answer.
yeah, a lot of people joke that all hazy IPAs taste exactly the same. Yet you have a very good reputation for making some of the best. How are your hazy IPAs different slash better? I mean, is it just going down to process, or what do you do different from the average hazy IPA brewer to stand out? Is it these du jour hops? Is it back to process? Is it, making sure that I mean, I feel like you don't half-ass anything at all, like in life.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
I mean, is there a secret? Tell us the secret.
Yes, the
yeah, I
secret.
mean it's so the secret, or if there is one,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, again, the brewing industry being so collegial, folks are very happy to share the one thing, and the hardest part, it sounds the easiest, everything, when you kind of just throw out something like, well, everything matters, pay attention to everything. When you throw that out in practice, that is so much harder to do and execute consistently every single time, every single time, every single time. And the idea, or this to be able to strive towards a concept of perfection, it might be different in the eyes of the customer or the beer critic or whoever else comes next. So it's sort of like a false thing to chase. That being said, one of the things that we do think makes a huge difference for us happened when we were able to start doing hop selection. This is going back quite a few years at this point. Hop selection was very important to mostly, at that point, um, uh, get rid of the bad. So
Oh, I see.
there's incredible variation from farm to farm, from year to year, from lot to lot. And it isn't it isn't this narrow agricultural product that you may think of. I don't know what a great example would be. Maybe like grain, right? So there's a pretty narrow set of specifications in your in malt that it's either going to be within spec or not within spec, and it's generally very tight, and it's kind of not a lot of variance from year to year, although there is some. With hops, there's a absolute ton of not great hops out there. Most of the hops are decent to pretty good, and then another narrow slice on that bell curve are outstanding to excellent hops. And to get rid of the bad was very, very important. That's a huge differentiator for us early in that selection process. And then not too long, maybe a season or two after that, I I was still frustrated with some of the hop lots that we had selected that thought rubbed incredibly well on the table, did not translate into the beer,
Hmm.
to our degree of expectation anyway. So basically the differentiation was like, well, why are they so great on the table, but they don't translate in the beer? Well, that's because they have to go through this all too critical interaction with the yeast in beer. So we started doing small benchtop fermentations once those lots had been pelletized, to then put them through a second screening to basically just do a second tier selection. And I know
Oh,
we're just a handful of breweries in the world that do that. But basically, in that first winnowing is to get rid of the bad, and then the second winnowing is to find the excellent.
does that mean you over select in your first winnowing because you know you're going to be cutting some of them later?
I think we frustrate the hell
Yeah.
out of the vendors that we do work with at first, and now they're finding it very intriguing, and because they're able to do all these kinds of analyses of all these different profiles, and they're sort of like, what is Trillium doing that is different that all the others are doing, and what is how do they get to this point, and then how do they know? And we're not doing a secondary analysis, laboratory analysis, although I guess we could, and it would be a very interesting study. Um, but if we skip that second step, we find ourselves disappointed sometimes. And I don't,
Okay.
if we're going to continue to kind of narrow that that range of differentiation from year to year, and be able to understand what there might be even better hops out there year to year, and it'd be a different, better expression as the farmers get better at what they do every year. Maybe there's a way to continue to evolve towards that better through the secondary process.
Yeah, I like that.
And then, wow, I mean, like, it's so thoughtful.
Yes, I know.
I'm like, wow.
I'm silenced.
But so final question, what do you think is the perfect age for a can of New England IPA? And how do you
Woo!
think that beer evolves? I have a date in mind that I usually ascribe to for NEIPA cans. But some people like that young green, couple day old. Some people like a little more weeks, myself included. Some people will hold them for a couple months to get the sweetness. Like, do you have a sweet spot for age in a can of NEIPA?
It's such an interesting question, and I think the underlying crux of it is that New England IPAs are so different than lots of other beer styles in that rapidity of change post packaging. One of the most challenging things that we have to do at Trillium is to try to predict the path that a hoppy beer is going to take at a pre-packaging. Is it heading in a good place? Does it need to get conditioned longer? Do we need to do something different? Do we need to a whole laundry list of things prior to packaging? And it maybe it's an annoying non-answer, but it really is it depends kind of thing. So I prefer a pale ale that has maybe 1.5, 2 pounds per barrel to be probably within I don't know, 2 weeks from packaging. And then sort of the intensity and the kind of that fresh uh, top note from the hop starts to lose it. You don't get that beautiful spike of floral delicate aromatics. It's not that it's bad, but it sort of starts to go the other way. And then for like those absolute monsters that are in the 7+ pounds per barrel, double IPA, triple IPA. Some people, you're not going to get that green edge for a pale ale at those hopping rates,
Right.
whereas you would for a very heavily dry hop beer. So, those beers might start to come into their own after 2 weeks and maybe peaking 4 to 6 weeks, and then in a good pocket for another 4 to 6 after that too. So, and then it's everything in between. So the hard part for customers is to know a brand very, very well, know a brewery very,
Hmm.
very well, and then know that that beer also has been stored cold, because those timelines that we talked about is temperature dependent. You cannot have we did forced aging tests. If you have one of our beers sitting at ambient temperatures, a day basically roughly translates to 5 days stored warm, you know?
Mm,
Oh yeah,
5 to 1. Wow.
you gotta refrigerate. That's
Uh-huh.
and then I feel like if once you refrigerate, especially like well-made beers with like low dissolved oxygen, I, I think I still have a couple of your hoppy beers in my beer fridge downstairs, and I haven't seen you in a few months. I'm gonna go have
Yeah,
one.
December.
Yeah, you better go
Yeah,
have one.
I should go have one. I think I have your Italian Pilsner downstairs. I have one can
Cool.
left, and I
Yeah.
will drink it. I will drink it today.
Also a
And
very hoppy beer.
yes, super hoppy, very, very hoppy. But yeah, it really is dependent on. I think the main thing and the takeaway of this conversation is process. The real and ingredients. I mean, that's what makes
It's
beer
everything.
good. It's everything, really.
Yeah.
So
It's annoying. I wish it was simpler.
no, no. JC, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with us about New England IPA. If people want to talk to you or learn more about Trillium, do you have social media handles or a website people can do that?
Yeah, our social handles are at Trillium Brewing. And I believe it's trilliumbrewing.com. And I always throw out my email in case any home brewers
Perfect.
or anyone wants to ask a question. It's jc@trilliumbrewing.com.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, folks.
Cheers.
Cheers. And we'll be right back with Matt Westfall of Counterweight Brewing after these messages.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. Still family owned, operated, and argued over.
Matt Westfall is the owner of Connecticut's Counterweight Brewing Company and has been working in the beer industry for more than 20 years. He co-founded Counterweight Brewing in 2017. The Counterweight team has been focused on brewing a wide range of styles, exploring old world tech traditions, as well as experimenting with new processes and techniques. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thanks for having him.
Yeah, of course. So what year did Counterweight open?
We opened our doors in 2017.
Okay, and then so before that, you were at New England Brewing Company for about a decade or so, and New England's really known for American IPAs. Sea Hag is a classic. If you're anyone listening, please come to Connecticut, drink some Sea Hag. Why did you decide that Headway, which is your flagship, be hazy? Or do you even consider Headway to be a New England IPA?
Yeah, we do. It's definitely an appearance is fairly hazy. Actually, when we first opened the doors to Counterweight, interestingly enough, Headway, the first handful of batches were pretty clear.
Really?
And as things changed a little bit and the narrative out in the market changed, we got an overwhelming demand from people that they preferred a hazy beer. So slowly that beer became more and more hazy as we switched our yeast strain, but our overall approach to a balance of bitterness and not an overly sweet style was certainly what we wanted to achieve with Headway.
And Headway, and this is something that I'm from Connecticut. Counterweight is one of my local breweries. One of the things I realize with a lot of beers in Connecticut is that they're just labeled IPA and they don't really say what style. And Headway is just merely labeled IPA. Why is that?
It's interesting. Kind of like I said, around that 2017 mark, the expectation from the majority of consumers, at least in our market, was that when they opened a beer that was labeled IPA and was going to be poured in their glass, that it was going to be somewhat murky, hazy, and the expectation was pretty clear. That was certainly different in my previous experience at the last brewery I worked at, and as things changed and evolved a little bit, the expectation on behalf of the IPA drinker certainly changed. And now we kind of feel it's flipped on its head, where when we make clear beer for our beer hall or elsewhere, we have to really call out that it's West Coast. Otherwise, the expectation ultimately is that it's going to be hazy.
I will say, as a mostly lifelong nutmeg stater, and
is that the name?
beer,
I didn't know that.
Don's from Canada, so yeah.
Nutmeg State. Okay. Anyways, I'm interrupting. You keep on.
I will tell you later about why it's called the Nutmeg State because it's very funny. Trust me. As a lifelong nutmegger or Constitution State, whatever, if I pour a beer, yeah, I expect it to be hazy. That's just what I've been. If the thing is, if you do pour a beer, and I'm sure this happens to you, Matt, if you pour an IPA and it comes clear, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, very much so.
Like, what the hell is this?
With the exception of a couple local brands, I would say the vast majority of the IPAs on the shelves around us are expected to certainly be hazy.
Yes, absolutely.
When you developed your recipe, were you influenced by other New England breweries, or like what was the process for developing your IPA recipe?
When we started to kind of move away from using a yeast that was dropping bright, we knew that the core ingredient change to make this beer hazy was ultimately going to be a British strain of yeast that was going to throw off a pretty loud ester profile to complement the hops.
I like your choice of words there. Loud ester profile. That's excellent.
So whereas when we were making, something like a West Coast with a Chico, it's much more of a neutral hop yeast profile rather. To really just let the hop shine off of. Whereas I feel when we were approaching making a New England style IPA, we were really using the characteristics of the British strain and the ester profile that it provided to be a much more integral part of what that beer presented like, both aromatically and flavor wise. So we looked for a strain that was going to complement the hop profile, and then we kind of took our own path as far as still providing a decent level of bitterness and headway. We're not quite as sweet as maybe some of these other beers. And that's by design so that while we can really celebrate some of that ester profile we hopefully achieve in every batch of that beer we make, we're also able to make that beer super drinkable. And it's something you can have a couple of rather than be fatigued by the bottom of the glass with something sweeter or maybe a little less hop bitterness to it.
Right. I like that
Uh,
thinking.
I know you don't share a lot of what's in Headway on the can or online, but can you walk us through the other process of making it? And then it's 6.5%, is that correct?
That's correct.
I believe that that's the like sweet spot for New England IPAs. Like that's a really great ABV. Why did you make, that's, I guess follow-up question is why did you make your flagship 6.5%?
I mean, Headway by design is really we called it Headway because we felt like if that beer was going to be successful, it would allow everything we do in the rest of the brewery to make headway. That if we could make an aromatically pleasant and flavorful beer that was consistently packaged with a high level of quality and gain the consumer's trust, that we would be able to kind of use the momentum of that brand to do everything else that we wanted to accomplish as brewers. So the way we really went about doing that is picking three basic core hops to put in that beer, which are pretty classic hops in all IPAs, being Mosaic, Citra, and Simcoe, and then having some supportive hops that have come in and out of Headway over the years, Centennial and Equinaut, and some other hops as well. And really, what changes the percentage of which one of those varieties takes front and center stage is each an individual harvest. So when we go out to select, maybe we get those hops back to our brewery and we feel that a little less Mosaic is needed, a little bit more Citra, or vice versa. And that kind of adjusts in the first couple months of the year as we bring our fresh lots back into the brewery and get to know what we're going to be working with for the rest of the year.
So
So
you
then,
constantly tweak this beer, is what you're
It's
saying.
always changing a little bit. And I think that most of the people that drink it on a pretty regular basis might not notice any drastic difference. It's us really trying to chase a certain level of consistency, not necessarily in a flavor profile, but
Mhm.
of a certain amplified flavor and aroma. We just really want to make sure that maybe the beer doesn't stay the same, but if it's changing, it's getting better.
As a lifelong Headway drinker, I have never noticed any change.
That's good to hear.
mm,
And I drink it pretty frequently. It is my go-to at my local pizza parlor. And yeah, I have never noticed any significant change, or it always tastes the same to me. It always tastes great. So
validation.
yeah, so there you
Um,
go.
so Matt, can you tell, thank you for walking us through Headway, but can you then walk us through how you think about your other NEIPAs? Obviously, you have a lot of knowledge from making Headway, but then, if you're going to make another beer, it's got to be different somehow. So what's that process, I guess?
Yeah, it usually starts with a hop profile, and depending on what our team really feels like it might be doing in the beer, we kind of work backwards from that. So something like we just released recently called Sticky Threads. It's a really an Amarillo cryo focused beer to really celebrate and draw out those flavors. And that beer is a little bit more sweet and maybe a little bit more of the classic conception of what a New England style IPA might be. Definitely a little bit sweeter in the finishing gravity, lower in BUs, and kind of exploring that spectrum of flavor that you can achieve within the style, whether that's leaning a little bit more heavy on bitterness like we do in something like Headway that also finishes a little drier, or approaching a beer that we want to finish a little bit sweeter so that we can add maybe an extra pound per barrel and really amplify something like Amarillo or a Nelson or something
Oh,
that we really want to scream off of that beer when it gets poured into your glass, either from the can or from our taps here at the beer hall.
yeah, I love both those hops, by the way. That's why I got a little bit excited there. So obviously, when we're talking about any kind of IPA, the hop varieties are what people think of first and foremost, but it's built on beer is built on grain. So can you tell us a little bit about, the grain bill, oats, wheats, where's the haze coming from? And is it just haze or is there flavor component to these different grains?
Yeah, our base malt is raw 2-row. It's in primarily every beer on the hazy spectrum of what we do very, very consistently. Rarely do we use something else. And then we're building off of that base with about 20% white wheat and then some flaked oats for some of our specialty beers. Headway doesn't have any oats in that beer, but it's really a pretty simple pale malt that we're ultimately just trying to control the level of sweetness with our mash temperature and to kind of build some mouthfeel with those oats and some of these beers that we do get to finish a little bit sweeter because typically those beers that finish a little bit sweeter with oats and things like that, we are dry hopping a little bit more aggressively, getting up into those high 3 pounds per barrel, maybe just crossing the threshold of 4 when we're talking about double IPA. So we want to make sure that there's enough base there to support what we're ultimately trying to achieve with our hop load, whether that's a Whirlpool edition or the dry hop itself.
And and so sorry, you think oats provides more for balancing that higher hop charge?
Yeah, so when we cross that like 3.5 pound per barrel threshold, we typically will add some oats into that to help kind of build some body and
I
provide
see.
further support to kind of build that bigger top charge off of.
It's a body thing.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, I think I have two questions. One is, do you think Connecticut hazy IPA or like New England IPAs are different than other states? And then I guess the second question is, do you think New England IPA and hazy IPA are the same thing or are they different? Because some people treat them differently, but some people think they're the same thing. So,
I think to kind of answer both questions at the same time, I think that we kind of have a pretty wide array of different breweries approaching this style in very different ways. And when you might buy something that you know is hazy or New England style IPA, although it might look similar, I do think the overall uh, flavor profile might be different. And I think that's in terms of dryness, sweetness, hop load, levels of aromatics. And I think that outside of Connecticut, obviously like states like Massachusetts and Vermont having some breweries that are very much synonymous with the style. And I guess hazy IPA doesn't have that same level of identity in Connecticut. Um,
yeah, I guess, I mean, yeah, because it's so this is for those listening, this episode is episode one is the hazy history, and then the second episode, which will debut 2 weeks after this episode, we are going to be talking with brewers outside of New England about the future of hazy, and there's a couple people we were going to talk to where like they're brewing 65 IBU hazies,
Mhm.
and
Yeah, I mean,
that's
that's
wild
in
to
line
me.
with Headway. I mean, we're not quite as high as that, but again,
Oh,
we're
really?
here to be fairly drinkable. It's in that mid
Mhm.
50s range, and
Hmm.
I've always been the believer that a firm, balanced hop bitterness provides a certain level of drinkability that you just don't get in a sweeter beer.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. I
So
like that you
any,
put
yeah.
thought into it. That's the main thing I like.
I just was doing a tasting of buffalo wings at J. Timothy's Tavern, which has Headway on, and your excellent Workhorse Pilsner, one of my favorites. And the bitterness is when you have wings with it, the bitterness is very apparent versus other beers in Connecticut that are hazier. So it was really fascinating too. I think of it as as a New England IPA, like a real classic example. But in eating food with it, I realized that yeah, there is a lot of BUs to it, more so than I realized.
Yeah, that helps with flavor and drinkability, but I also think it helps as being a pretty widely distributed beer. It helps with shelf stability. And we want to make sure that dissolved oxygen levels, the guys running our canning line who do a phenomenal job are able to put something into the can of real quality and that's going to last so that as the consumer goes into a store and might pick up a can that's even been sitting out warm for a month or so, that they're still going to get an aromatic, flavorful, shelf stable beer to go home with and hopefully continue to trust our brand.
Oh, I love that.
Nice.
I love that you design the beer with packaging in mind. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but like it's not just thinking about the flavor. This tastes good, we're done. Like you've thought about all these other things. I think that's great.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to learn more about Headway or learn more about Counterweight, can they reach out via website or social media? What are those, what's that information?
Yeah, counterweightbrewing.com and Counterweight Brewing on Instagram. Check us out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Matt.
for asking me to be here.
Of course. Cheers.
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 So, Don, I know you want to know the story of why Connecticut is called the Nutmeg State.
I want to know why, yeah, I want to know that. And I also want to know why all the Connecticut breweries don't put nutmeg in their hazy IPAs.
Because that would, I mean, you could do a milkshake IPA with nutmeg. So anyway, back in the day, I don't like actually know when, like the 18th century or so.
I remember those
Yeah,
days.
yeah, but you were alive. People would sell, nutmeg was a valuable commodity, and then they would sell nutmeg in Connecticut. They would like fool people by selling nutmeg, but they would fill it with like wood shavings instead. So we're known as
Oh,
it's a real like shyster kind of thing. So
oh,
I
I
believe that's
see.
I'm probably like, that's probably wrong, but that's my
Well,
interpretation
somebody
of
will
what we're
tell
called.
us. Please
Somebody,
email us and
leave us
tell us
MLS about
how
the, nut-
Emily is wrong.
yeah, a lifelong Connecticut person, and I don't know why we're called the Nutmeg State.
What did you
So,
think
but
about that episode, though?
I mean, I'm just, again, it made me full of more pride. It also made me realize how the New England Brewing Company, like New England beers, like New England style IPAs, all started from these really small, kind of out of the way, like not unknown, but like
Yeah,
small breweries. And I think that kind of drove demand because you had to drive or you had to go to, the long counter at Trillium in Boston, and they were really tiny, they
yeah.
weren't making a lot of beer. And so this kind of scarcity with newness, I think really drove. That's my interpretation of it.
Hmm.
I mean, there was a lot of like process, and it was, yeah. What did you think of the episode, Don?
Yeah, I mean, I never thought about that scarcity thing. I thought what drove its popularity is it's freaking delicious.
They are
Um,
good.
but what I learned is that the thought and process behind it, and I'm always kind of amazed, sort of like you remember our vanilla episode several
Oh, of
episodes
course, of
ago?
course.
I think that was one of your favorite episodes. But
It's
anyways,
a great one.
remember how he said, you can't just pick the vanilla bean. It has to go through this process. And also when they're fertilizing the vanilla orchid, there's like a 6 hour window that they can do
It's
it anywhere.
wild.
Like all how they discovered that was absolutely blew me away. And so similarly now with this hazy IPA, like it's not just late hopping, it
No,
was so there was this confluence of yeast selection, protein levels in the grains, oats, whether that's oats or wheat or flaked versus malted and all that, and then the late charge of hops. Like, if you're
it
opening a
just
brewery,
feels.
yeah, if you're opening a brewery, like, I'm gonna make a beer that's just like all these other beers how did somebody figure out doing this different thing to make this incredibly different beer from any other IPA on the market? Like, I just think that's amazing.
It's why beer's so great.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Anyway, visit us at allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you're interested in supporting the show, allaboutbeer.com/support to support this show and others. If you have any questions for the experts, email podcast@allaboutbeer.com. That's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. Don, how can people reach out to you?
Oh, I am at the Dawn of Beer on X Threads and Blue Sky, and on Instagram. And people can drop me an email at dawn@thedawnofbeer.com. And yourself?
I am at Pints and Panels on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and my website is www.pintsandpanels.com. If you enjoy this show, please share it with your friends, post about us on social media, and like and subscribe to the show. Please help us spread the word of good beer. Here's a final word from our sponsor.
This program is brought to you by Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, where trailblazing runs in the family. From crafting a movement with their iconic pale ale to taking the IPA haze craze nationwide with Hazy Little Thing, it's an adventurous spirit you can taste in every sip. Find your next favorite beer wherever fine beverages are sold. With new brews for every season, there's always something to discover. Sierra Nevada Brewing Company, still family-owned, operated, and argued over.
This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Ciao da.
Oh, Jesus.